The opinions on this program are those of the program host and guest and not necessarily those of WPSL. WPSL does not endorse products that may be mentioned. Any reproduction or retransmission of this broadcast is strictly prohibited without written consent of WPSL. Legal questions? Ask a lawyer. Give us a call at 340-1590, 340-1590 here at the studios of WPSL. And Ask a Lawyer with your host, attorney Stuart M. Address.
Good morning. I'm Stuart Address, and this is Ask a Lawyer for June 10th, 2022. Boy, you never know what's going on behind the scenes. 30 seconds before I was on air, my connection to my microphone fell off. And I was there fiddling around really quickly trying to get it on because there's nobody here with me. Greg's in the studio, and hoping to get on before I was told I'm on the air, and nobody on Facebook would have been able to hear me, which is actually very important this morning.
That's a public service, actually.
That's a public service, yes. They can't hear me. Sometimes that's true. Because, you know, my mother and my sister have often complained to me that sometimes they learn of news involving my family, usually my son, and they learn it on Facebook for the first time because they haven't heard it from me.
Hey, I think that's becoming regular with a lot of people, I think.
I know that is becoming regular with a lot of people, and I get no end to the grief. So, if you'll all permit me, I'd like to give some breaking news here on the air and on Facebook live for the first time so that my mother gets it simultaneously. So if you'll all indulge me. Yesterday, late, my son received an email from Nova Southeastern University, where he will be attending starting August 15th. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. He moves out on August 15th. I'll be crying then, I'm laughing now. Anyway, this email letter starts out by stating, Mother, you should be sitting down. Congratulations. I am pleased to confirm your acceptance to join the Nova Southeastern University Farquhar Honors College. Your affiliation will begin with the fall 2022 semester. The Honors College is highly selective. Only 10% of NSU undergraduate students are extended membership, and it goes on and on. So, Ma, everybody, Aaron is in the Honors College at Nova starting this fall. So,
wow, that
is a wow.
That's great news.
Yes,
Honors College.
He came to me with that email. You know, this kid who proclaims, meh, huh, bump, you know, nothing's important, nothing's significant, nothing matters. Well, you know, I see on Facebook, I've been telling people almost daily now, old videos that I had posted of my son, you know, when he was, I don't know, anywhere from 4 to 14, when he was cute. And sometimes when he was really younger, he'd be singing and dancing around and occasionally in his underwear, falling to the ground, and just very cute. And now he's very serious, very teenage-like, and he knows everything. But oh yes, he came out yesterday with this email that he wanted desperately to show me. And so yes, there are things that matter to these teenagers, even though they pretend that nothing matters and that everything is cum si cum sa, que sera sera.
So was Daddy an honor student at Rutgers? Or actually, the other question, is there any such thing as an honor student at Rutgers?
Well, at Rutgers, you can graduate with honors. I graduated with one mark slower, departmental distinction. But at Rutgers for political science, there is the undergraduate associate's program at the I've known it for all my life. Oh, forget it. At the master's program, the doctoral program, college. It starts with an E. I don't know. I'm going brain dead these days as I get older. But anyway, I was offered admission into the undergraduate associate's program. So I studied and took all my political science classes at the honors college, and got my undergraduate associate's certificate. And that was the equivalent of the honors program for political science. Oh, goodness.
Awesome. That's hey, well, the apple obviously doesn't fall too far off the tree, huh?
Yes, and in all the good ways and in all the bad ways.
Oh my, yeah.
You know, he may beat me in innate intelligence, but he also beats me in anger and all these things I had to learn to melt down over the course of decades. Hopefully he will learn it sooner, particularly since his area of expertise and will be is psychology. All right, speaking of psychology and the law, which is an actual course at Nova, one which Aaron thinks he'll ace. I can't wait for him to try.
What is our rabbi teaching that one too? I mean,
no, I don't think so, but we're gonna do psychology and the law today, based upon last night's primetime congressional hearings on the January 6th insurrection. And since I know there's so many in my audience who don't believe it was an insurrection, I hope I will get a number of calls at 772-340-1590.
hey, I was watching Rangers hockey, so I mean, you know.
You know something? I was not watching Rangers hockey.
That's why they lost.
Hockey.
That's why
I was taping it and I watched it afterwards, much to my dismay, with less than 2 minutes to go, which is usually when they give up the tying or winning goal. So, to the hearing, because I'll never get through today all the things I wanted to get through. Let's start out with some key comments from last night's hearing from key players. Now, Liz Cheney is the congresswoman from Wyoming, and she is soon to be an ex-congresswoman from Wyoming, facing a primary challenge from within her own party, who basically has expelled her for her cooperation with the January 6th committee and for her willingness to put partisan labels aside and look at matters impacting the nation's security with an independent mind, as has another representative who serves on the January 6th committee, another Republican representative, as they say, a rhino, Republican in name only, but I would say a true Republican, a TR. Anyway, Congresswoman Cheney last night said that Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. She said that the blame was laid at his feet and commented that President Trump believed his supporters at the Capitol, and I quote, this is her, were doing what they should be doing. This is what he told his staff as they pleaded with him to call off the mob. Congresswoman Cheney also said, on this point, there is no room for debate. She said that Trump had a, quote, sophisticated 7-part plan, end quote, to overturn the election over the course of several months. She also commented that, quote, those who invaded our Capitol and battled law enforcement for hours were motivated by what President Trump had told them, that the election was stolen and that he was the rightful president. President Trump summoned the mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Now, she said a lot of other things, but I'm going to move on. But before I do, why was she taking such a prominent role last night in the hearing? Well, I will agree it's good politics, but it's also in the hope that it is Republicans like she and Republican witnesses, conservative jurists, who may be the ones most likely to affect the minds of at least some percentage of those who still support the former president. No, nobody's going to persuade all 35% of his solid base. But if you persuade 10% of that 35%, it may be enough to move the next election. So that is one of the purposes. Another is to lay at the feet of the American public the truth of the facts and to lay that truth out for posterity for 20 years from now, 100 years from now, when the history of our present is capable of somber and non-reflexive review. Now, Greg Jacob, who is the former counsel to Vice President Mike Pence, he said to the Trump allied lawyer who you've probably all heard of, John Eastman, and he supposedly said to Mike Pence, quote, "Thanks to your bullshit, we are under siege," end quote. And I hope I wasn't bleeped, because this is political history. Now, there was an officer yesterday who testified, and her name was Caroline Edwards. And she was one of the first officers to engage with the rioters, the mob, the insurrectionists at Peace Circle, which is where they first encountered the Capitol Police. And she said last night, literal blood, sweat, and tears were shed that day defending the building. She was injured several times as part of an altercation involving members of the Proud Boys while defending the US Capitol. And before I go into something she said, let me tell you from my own recollection how she explained she was injured. Well, first, when this group of several hundred started pushing up against so-called bike racks that were set up to block them, she was one of those first officers at that first point of contact, pushing back against them. She soon got knocked away and thrown backwards, where she ultimately hit the back of her head on cement and was knocked unconscious. She remembers regaining consciousness and seeing something which I'll describe to you in a few moments. But more important than what she saw is what she did. Having hit her head, and most likely having a concussion, she got up and re-engaged in the battle. She moved towards the steps of the Capitol, where the mob had been heading, and re-engaged them on the steps of the Capitol in trying to hold the line. She was knocked around and injured yet again. She got up and slipped in another officer's blood. And again, she re-engaged in an effort to stave off those who seeked to invade the actual Capitol itself. Obviously, she was unsuccessful, as were all the other Capitol Police and Metropolitan Police who ultimately showed up. But she said something last night which truly struck me. I think I'll remember it forever. She said she had been called a lot of things in the days, weeks, and months since then and to this day. She'd been called a traitor. She'd been called she'd been called a lot of things. And she said, and I'm none of them. But one of the things she said she had been called by some is a hero. Yet when she finished with her litany of words that she had been called, she said she was none of them. I beg to differ. She was one of them. She was and is a hero. She's not a hero because she got hurt. She would have been a hero if she hadn't been hurt. She was a hero because she upheld her oath, defended the Capitol and those within it, not from an errant protester or angry constituent, unexpectedly from an angry mob seeking to interfere with the vote to confirm the winner of the election.
And I think what was interesting about her testimony was the fact that she said this was not her first civil disobedience.
Right. She had been trained in
defense.
group disobedience, and she had encountered other groups of protesters. And she said never once had her duty been called into question.
Yeah.
Never once had it been personalized that she was the enemy.
Yeah, she's never faced a group that had pepper spray and tear gases.
Right. She never faced a group that had pepper spray and tear gas. And she never faced a group that seeked to do her harm because of who she was. And we don't mean just a cop. We mean on the other side of the political perspective of that day. And so anybody who was that was in danger. Now, the committee replayed segments of some speeches of the former president where he called the crowd tourists. He said it was a love fest. However, Officer Edwards recalled differently. Quote, when I fell behind that line and I saw, I could just remember my breath catching in my throat because what I saw was just a war scene. It was like something I had seen in the Middle East. There were officers on the ground. They were bleeding. They were throwing up. I was slipping in people's blood. It was hours and hours of hand-to-hand combat. A documentarian who coincidentally had been in DC a few other times in November and December and was making a documentary about our country and the election and our process, happened to be in the right place at the wrong time, but I guess for him, you'd say it was the right time. He said, quote, for anyone who didn't understand how violent the event was, I saw it, I documented it, and I experienced it, end quote. Nick Quested, who was the documentarian, is the documentarian, described the violence this way. Quote, I documented the crowd turn from protesters to rioters to insurrectionists. I was surprised at the size of the group, the anger and the profanity. I heard incredibly aggressive chanting, and I subsequently shared that footage with the authorities. He had been embedded with the Proud Boys for several days and had interviewed the leader just the night before January 6th. and had no inclination that January 6th was going to prove to turn out the way it did. Matter of fact, he recalled last night being confused. Why was this group walking towards the Capitol as opposed to towards President Trump's speech? Well, obviously, the plan had been set. Now, Ivanka Trump, yes, Ivanka Trump, the daughter of the former president, was asked whether, after former Attorney General Bill Barr had spoken, what she thought of it. And she said, quote, "I respect Attorney General Barr, so I accepted what he was saying," end quote. What he was saying was that the Justice Department had found no sufficient evidence to overturn the election or to believe there was substantial fraud. Indeed, again, I'm going to use a bad word here, but it's part of our history. Attorney General William Barr, in testimony to the committee, said that he referred to President Trump's claims of election fraud as bullshit. He says he resigned in December of 2020, in part because of Trump's effort to perpetuate the so-called big lie by utilizing and politicizing the Justice Department. He said, and quote, "I didn't want to be a part of it. We can't live in a world where the incumbent administration stays in power based upon its view, unsupported by specific evidence, that the election was a fraud." And he specifically stated under oath that he told President Trump, quote, "I told him that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time and was doing grave disservice to the country," end quote. Now, with that specter of having been told in December that this was horsebucking, there was no evidence to support it, Trump still called for his supporters to show up on January 6th. Well, once they began to engage the Capitol Police and the protest turned to a mob and the mob to insurrectionists, there was testimony given by the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Mark Milley. And Chairman Milley told Trump's staff, specifically Trump's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, that he was not going to allow the effort of Trump to politicize the conversations between them. Milley said that Meadows had said to him, "We have to kill the narrative that the vice president is making all the decisions. We need to establish the narrative. We need to establish the narrative that the president is still in charge and that things are steady or stable," or words to that effect. Milley told the January 6th investigators, "I immediately interpret that as politics, 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 politics. Red flag for me personally, no action. But I remember it distinctly." Now, before he went into his next statement, he commented that he did not hear from President Trump. There were no orders given to him to engage the National Guard, to engage the military. President Trump was absent, silent, incommunicado. Gee, it sounds like a third world coup. Anyway, in contrast to Trump's silence. The vice president was not so silent. Milley referred to Pence as being very animated, very direct, very firm, and told me, get the military there, get the guard down there, put down this situation, etc. And before we go to the next caller, let me just say, I applaud Vice President Pence for his orders. But honestly, I have to question whether he had the authority to issue those orders, as much as I like the orders. He was not the president. The president was the president, and the president was silent. I honestly don't think that General Milley, as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, had the right to accept the orders of Vice President Pence, even though I applaud them. And with that, let's go to the caller, Charlie, on line 1. Hi, Charlie.
Good morning, Stuart. How are you today?
I am doing fine. How are you?
Good, and congratulations on your freedom.
My freedom. Thank you very much. Yes.
It cost me some money when my kid did it. So
yes, definitely a little bit of coin it's going to cost.
Okay. I like Trump. Okay. I do disagree with how he handled, not accepting the fact that Biden was president. Okay. But from what I understand, he offered Pelosi the National Guard prior to this whole thing, and she turned it down. Matter of fact, the National Guard that would cover DC, from what I understand, was a fairly good distance away for some reason, and couldn't be deployed quickly in any case. All right.
Okay.
And the other thing I'd like to just add, I think that America would be better off with a Trumpian presidency. In other words, for President Biden to all of a sudden crown Trump King MAGA. What a crazy nickname. I mean, make America great again. I think that even a Democrat would like to see America great again.
Yes, but not in Trump's perspective of what that means.
Stuart, from the standpoint of we should have energy independence, we were buying oil and natural gas from Russia. I understand we decided not to do that right now. But, I mean, have you ever seen gas this high? The last time it came even close was
in the 70s.
When the whole thing crashed. When the economy...
All right, but that. You may have a point there, but that's not the topic, and I'm not going to go into gas prices.
Yeah,
that's just not the focus tonight.
I'm sorry. But I'll give it the air and...
All right, thank you.
Okay?
Thank you, Charlie.
Bless America.
Right. God bless America. I agree with you. For those on Facebook, Charlie was commenting that President Trump offered Speaker Pelosi the National Guard, and she rejected it. But let's put this into context. The National Guard was offered days ahead of time when it was not clear to the Congress anything in the scope of what was about to happen. If it had been clear, there would have been a lot more Capitol Police there, and so would the Metropolitan Police have been there. So the offer was sort of like a sleight of hand, in my view.
Now, there is a branch of the military that said that the National Guard was notified the first part of December that there was going to be something going on the 6th. So that had been going on for a month.
The question is, what was the scope of what they were notified? Was this just a protest, or was this going to be an invasion of the Capitol?
Right. Well, nobody expected that, I don't think.
Right. So, I mean, suggesting that the National Guard be called out or making an offer of the National Guard to me, that's like saying to, I lack a good analogy at the moment, but it's not consistent with the magnitude of what was understood to be the reality on the ground. If it had been known that there was going to be an attempt to take over the Capitol, interfere with the vote, hang the vice president, I'm pretty sure Speaker Pelosi would have accepted the offer of the National Guard. And anybody who thinks otherwise is Looney Tunes.
Yeah, I just remember back in the day when I was trapped in the Santa Barbara riots. Really, the local sheriff and the local police were just totally overwhelmed, and it wasn't until the
Right.
National Guard got there that things started to quiet down.
Right, and indeed, I forget who it was, but one of the generals I recall, not last night, but earlier, testifying that they were getting requests for assistance, but that they were unable to respond because they weren't coming through the proper hierarchy of command. And that it took quite a while before they had, their line of authority and could mobilize.
And of course, they had the problem in DC that we had in Los Angeles during the Rodney King riots, where none of the agencies were on the same radio frequencies.
Well, you're right. The different agencies not communicating and not being on the same quote unquote radio frequency. Yeah, that was a definite failure, in the ability to defend the Capitol. And we can see how that happens elsewhere. I mean, I think the Russians thought that they would be drinking vodka in Kiev a few days after they sauntered in, and indeed they're mired in a war of massive proportions. But that was a radio show from the past, and will probably be a radio show in the future. Let me say one other thing before I go into some other issues here that relate to last night. One other thing that Congresswoman Cheney said, which I really think everybody should listen to, they should think about, and they should reflect upon, honestly. She had a critical message for her Republican colleagues who are defending what she called the indefensible. She, having faced major backlash and knowing that she is going to lose her seat in Congress, not to a Democratic challenger, but to a Republican primary challenger put up to defeat her, she said that, quote, referring to her Republican colleagues, there will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain. Really, that is a very strong statement. Yeah, you can all say it's political, but I don't think history will record it that way. I think, and we've talked about on this show other times, I think those who have been defending the president, those who have supported the big lie when immediately after January 6th and after the election they were saying otherwise, will be recorded in history as dishonorable and having failed in the oath that they took. It will be a stain like Benedict Arnold, because as Benedict Arnold almost changed the course of the Revolutionary War in favor of the British, those who supported and continue to support President Trump and the lie, when they know better, are equally culpable as Benedict Arnold. Now, mind you, I am not saying that those of his supporters out there who truly believe that the election was stolen are anything like what I just described. I believe they're misinformed. I believe they've been deceived. That's my belief. Their belief is different. Time will tell what is the truth. But the only way I will be wrong is if Trump wins in 2024, establishes his autocracy, does away with democracy and the Constitution, and writes the future history books. Then I will be wrong. Because as they all say, history is written by the victor. So we're looking at whose version of history is going to prevail. In my view, we're looking at whether or not we have a democracy or an autocracy. So let's look at some other recent developments. As recent as this past Tuesday and Wednesday, things that the committee didn't yet have last week, but they will have by next week. Emails, more emails from John Eastman, the Trump lawyer who concocted the scheme in which how Vice President Pence could supposedly fail to certify the results presented to Congress, send it back to the states, where the states would then send a new slates of electors, and Trump would be elected president of the United States. That Eastman, not the Kodak Eastman. And U.S. District Judge David Carter ordered Eastman late Tuesday to provide additional emails to the committee, and then modified his order on Wednesday of this week to require Eastman to finish releasing the documents by June 13th. Now, that is on Monday. Eastman is the architect of the legal theory root of Trump's attempt to overturn the presidential election, that Pence could declare the results in several states in dispute, those results would go uncounted, and doing so would have turned Trump from the loser to the winner. Now, he must now give 159 more emails to the House Select Committee investigating the attack on the Capitol, including one that the judge says is evidence of a likely crime for the effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election. That's coming from a federal judge. Included in this batch of emails that he must now turn over, and that only the judge so far has read, is an email from December 22nd, 2020, that pertains to the potential crime. This email apparently considers whether to ask the courts to rule on the proper interpretation of the Electoral Count Act and risk a court finding that the act prevents Vice President Pence from rejecting electors. In other words, there were emails where there was a discussion, should we ask for the federal courts to interpret this federal statute and risk losing that argument? And the judge indicated that it was likely evidence of a crime because, quote, the attorney concluded that a negative court ruling would tank the January 6th strategy. He encouraged the legal team to avoid the courts. This email cemented the direction of the January 6th plan, the judge wrote in his order. Trump's legal team thereafter chose not to seek recourse in the courts on this issue. Instead, they forged ahead with a political campaign to disrupt the electoral count something they could have asked the courts to rule upon ahead of time. And what the federal judge said is, quote, lawyers are free to bring cases. They are not free to evade judicial review to overturn a democratic election, end quote. Other emails which Eastman must release include discussions about his proposal for Pence to reject or delay counting electoral votes on January 6th, and actions to obtain alternative state electors in the days leading up to January 6th. 10 emails apparently relate to meetings that Eastman joined in early December with high-profile members of the Trump White House, strategizing ways to overturn the election. Boy, I'd like to read those emails. Quote, documents include the agenda for a meeting on December 9, 2020, end quote. The judge continued, quote, the agenda included a section entitled Ground Game, following November 4 election results, during which a sitting member of Congress discussed a plan to challenge the electors in the House of Representatives, end quote. And the judge ordered Eastman to release 3 direct communications from Trump. Oh boy. Oh boy, here come the smoking guns. One is a handwritten note from Trump about the size of his rallies. No big deal. The other 2 were relayed by Trump's executive assistant and sought advice for reframing Trump's public statements about a plan to send alternate slates of electors to Congress, an element of the effort to overturn the election, wrote the federal judge. Wow. Oh boy. There are more emails coming, and we know a little bit about what some of them involve, and it is big stuff, big stuff.
And I think when the day is done and all of this stuff is, as you said, going into the history books, this will dwarf Watergate.
Dwarf Watergate, absolutely, absolutely. You had Woodward and Bernstein were on CNN last night. I don't usually see them together anymore. Very often I see Woodward giving commentary to CNN, but they were both on, and I commented to my son, who was temporarily watching as well. I said, I remember when these were kids. I remember when their faces were cub reporters looking to make a name for themselves and stumbled upon Watergate.
And that's how they were attacked, that they were just trying to make a name for themselves.
Exactly. But look how history records Watergate and how history records Woodward and Bernstein. And look also, I beg of you, to how history records the Republican members of Congress and the Senate who looked at the facts, supported the investigation, were ready to vote in favor of articles of impeachment, and encouraged Nixon to resign. And resign he did. Look in comparison, as Liz Cheney commented, to the dishonor of future generation of legislators who believed one thing and said one thing immediately after January 6th, and then were cowed into the big lie and repeating it and supporting it over and over again. It's old people that talk about the old days when it was better. So I guess I'm old now, because I remember when I truly respected the House and the Senate, and when I revered the Senate, because the Senate was the place when an angry slight majority in the House couldn't simply get its way, even if the same party was in control of the Senate, because the Senate was the place for deliberative consideration before some quick vote. And often in the Senate is where you had the Republicans and the Democrats cooperating, at least in terms of debate and the ability and willingness to vote against their party if that's what their conscience dictated to them. Now, instead, what we have in both parties, but much more so in the Republican Party, is you can't vote against us on any vote, or you're a traitor. Now, look, okay, there are a couple of Republicans in the Senate and a handful in the House who do on occasion and sometimes on important matters vote against their party. But that is not the same as truly considering every piece of legislation on its merits. And where you have a political disagreement with the other side, negotiating to get the best piece of the pie that you can get, which is politics with the positive spin on the word, not politics stated with derision. Politics is not bad. Being political is not bad. It is when your adherence to a political party dwarfs your adherence to your own conscience, to adherence to the Constitution, that politics is a dirty word. I don't blame anybody who evaluates the facts and truly believes that there's a different way of doing things and stands up for it to the end. But where we are at our best is when we talk to each other and say, on these issues, we can agree. And let's put the other issues aside for now because we're never going to agree. So, for example, I know the show is blinded. On gun control. There was a statement from the media earlier in the week that it seems from sources inside the Senate that we may have agreement on a small gun control bill this evening, and that would be on raising the age to purchase certain types of weapons. Well, the source is wrong. There were certain key senators on the Republican side who said they were against raising the age and that there would be no agreement on this topic. And once again, after I think it was 10 mass shootings this weekend, not 10 dead, 10 mass shootings. Once again, we have no gun control legislation, even simply saying that you can't buy a weapon until you're 21. I mean, we can make them not drink until they're 21, but we can't make them not buy a weapon? Where is the logic in that? You don't let them buy weapons at 18, let them drink. It's absurd. That has to be the influence of the NRA. That has to be the influence of big money. Because where's the big money lobbyists on allowing kids to drink at 18? It doesn't exist. There's no money there. A heck of a lot of money by the NRA. get people to oppose voting to increase the age at which you can purchase guns. So I was going to discuss in detail the various crimes which might have been committed and which are being investigated. But instead of discussing them in detail, let me just give you not even the statutory sections, but the essence of what they are. It is to defraud the United States by scheming to block the electoral count. One is obstruction of the election count in Congress. One is conspiracy to do that. One is coercion of political activity. Another is political use of official authority. Conspiracy against the rights and deprivation of rights. Willfully depriving any person of federal rights under color of law. And seditious conspiracy, which forbids conspiracy between two or more people by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States. Those are among the felonies being investigated against President Trump himself. And with that, I leave you until next Friday, when who knows what we'll be discussing. I still have these contract stuff I'm ready to discuss, but there's too much other stuff that's more fun and more interesting and much more serious. So until next week, I'm Stuart Adress for Ask the Lawyer. Have a good weekend. Have a good week. Be safe. And I'll be back next Friday.
And in the meantime, we'll go look for some baby formula on the You've been listening to Ask a Lawyer. Good show, Stuart. Right here on WPSL, Port St. Lucie, Talk of the Treasure Coast, webcaster of the world, and WSTU Stuart, Martin County's Heritage Station.